a man who has served with fidelity to the Constitution for many years, the Thomas Jefferson of our day, Dr. Ron Paul.
No mic today. Okay, you'll have to let me know if you don't hear me, then I'll speak out. Okay, here, how's this? This is okay, very good, we'll use this. Well, thank you very much for that nice welcome, and thank you for coming out. It is true, we were there last night. What a difference between two states. Last night we were in New York, and sometimes they have to sort of twist my arm a little bit to go into New York City, but we did. We were on the Jon Stewart show. But interestingly enough, there were some supporters there that wanted to have a little rally afterwards, and that was pretty amazing. You think only limited government, free market people live outside of Washington or outside of New York. It's outside of Washington D.C. as well, but it was really a big rally. It was very encouraging. But everything's been encouraging lately. The meetings have been going very well. The organization is going very well. And of course, what I'm most interested in is the message that we've been talking about. I've personally been talking about it for a lot of years, but it seems like it's really catching on. And there's a couple of good reasons for that, I believe. The fact that I've been in and out of Congress for a good many years, but always involved in education, economic education, and really talking about the same thing for many, many years. But it just seems like, even compared to 4 years ago when I ran in 07 and 08, there's a big difference. And I don't think it's because my message is different. Most people give me credit for the same message all along, and that stays the same. The country has changed, the world has changed, attitudes have changed, and people are starting to recognize that we have some big problems. And one of the biggest ones is just too much spending and too much debt, and we got to get control of it. And I think that's what people are anxious to talk about, and that's been the thing that I've been talking about for many, many years. But I also have been emphasizing certain things in the economy, because over the last 10, 20 years, I've talked about the business cycle and why we have bubbles and why we have recessions. And sometimes that sounds esoteric. Why does anybody want to hear a politician talk about business cycle theory? Well, there's a good reason. Because if you understand why there are bubbles and artificial booms, then you understand why there has to be a correction. The correction is when you have recessions and depressions, and that's when people lose their jobs. So it's very, very important that we understand exactly how these cycles work. Many times, and still today, there are many people around this country and even around the world that say that the reason when you have booms and busts, it's inherent in capitalism, it's inherent in free markets, it's these conditions that are natural, you just have to deal with them. And their theories in the past have been, well, in a recession people don't spend as much money, so if we just tell them to spend more money, everything is going to be okay. But it's actually the wrong thing to do, because if you have a recession and people are losing their jobs and they're worried about the future, and they don't have any money in the bank, they can't spend more money. What if they have 5 credit cards and they don't have any more, can't get any more credit cards? You tell them to spend more money. Well, most people can understand that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But what happens if the government believes that's the answer? That's been one of our big problems. We have spent too much money. Our debt is too big. We print too much money, and we regulate too much. So we get into the crisis, which we should have been able to anticipate. So far, what have we done? We have inflated, and we continue to tax, we continue to regulate, and then we still continue to mess around and pretend that all we need to do is print money. So the real culprit in the business cycle isn't the free market. The real culprit is the Federal Reserve System, and that's why we have to address the Federal Reserve. In the 1930s, when we had a depression, they blamed it on free markets and the gold standard. I'll tell you what, just printing money and pretending it's wealth is not a very good solution. It's a bigger part of the until the 1930s, although we had many of these cycles before for various mismanagement of the economy and the monetary system, generally it was thought the government wasn't supposed to solve all the problems and spend more money and print more money. And in 1921, that's what we did. We just ignored it, and we had a bad depression because it was a consequence of the printing a lot of money and spending a lot of money, running up a lot of debt in World War I. The correction came, it lasted a year and was over. Nobody hardly even remembers about it or studies about it. But in the Depression, we changed our attitude. Government had to do something, and that's politicians like that. I'll take care of it, you know, and solve all the problems. Of course, the politician gets credit for the good times too, because they're spending money and they're borrowing money, they're printing money, and it doesn't look like it costs anything. And so politicians quite frequently get the credit for this. And but in the 1930s, the attitude changed, and they said, no, not only the government doesn't cause the problems, the government can get us out of the problems. We just need to spend a lot more money and borrow a lot more money. And guess what? The Depression really lasted from the 1929 up until after the war, about 1947 is when we really finally got out of the Depression. And yet, we haven't learned anything yet. We're doing the same thing over again. We're doing what Japan did, and they've been in the doldrums for 20 years. They don't allow the correction to come. So if we want jobs and economic growth, we have to get rid of the mistakes. And that's what happens when you have a Federal Reserve that messes around with interest rates and causes people to build too many houses and mismanage things. And you have to eventually eliminate the debt and the burden. Because if you as an individual want economic growth, and all you do is you owe money and you're not earning enough to pay your bills, you have to do something about it. You can't keep growing because you can't borrow any more money. So what an individual has to do is they have to cut back. Maybe if they have 2 or 3 cars, maybe they should have one instead of 2 houses, maybe 1 house. If they're living beyond their means, they have to come and live within their means and start paying down the debt. When the debt is paid down, then you have growth again and you can improve your economy, your personal economy. And that is what a country has to do. But that is also very difficult because of the politics of it all, because people want to be taken care of. So many of our problems I see come from some very basic fundamentals, and that has to do what freedom is all about. Our society and our government and our country had a better understanding of what freedom was all about than probably any other country, and we did rather well. Far from perfect, but at least there was a principle of private property and free markets and profits and these sort of things that really gave us a great prosperity. But we've been slipping for a long time because we have depended on the size and growth of government. And even in this recent time, although most people date our severe problems now from 2008, this country hasn't had any good job growth for over 10 years. It's really the beginning of our current problem occurred with the NASDAQ bubble bursting. That was in the year 2000. So we've been in the doldrums. Everybody knows that manufacturing jobs have gone overseas. And it isn't that they just don't like us anymore. I mean, American businessmen, they'd love it if they could have, build plants here. But we can be competitive with the regulations, the taxation, the labor rates, the monetary system, and this great burden. And so, they either have to go bankrupt or go overseas. And so, as much as it would be nice to blame somebody else, we have to look to ourselves on why people leave. And right now, business people have like $1.5 trillion sitting overseas. And they don't bring it back home to invest here, because as soon as they bring it back, they get hit with a big tax. And then they know what the taxation is. They don't know what kind of problems they're going to have with conforming to the Obama medical care. Sounds like a great thing. Everybody gets free medical care, but business people are frightened about that, and they know they can't afford it. So as long as those conditions last, it's going to be very difficult to invite businesses back into our country. But that has to be done, and it is the understanding of the marketplace. But to understand economics, we also have to understand personal liberty. I work on the assumption that, as was indicated by Jefferson on down, that our rights do not come from government. Our rights come from our Creator. Our life and our liberty comes from our Creator, and that's where it starts. But it should follow that if you have a right to your life, and all life is precious, and you have a right to liberty, that means you have a right to do what you want with your life. And you should be, if you have incentives and you want to work hard and you make some money, you got to have the right to keep your money. I mean, that to me would be the logical thing. And the founders understood that. That's why they didn't invent this notion of the income tax. That came later on when they decided in 1913, along with the Federal Reserve, that we would have the income tax in order for the government to grow. But the reason why I dislike the income tax is that it's a basic principle